kill her and her friends, and we're gonna keep moving on. I heard some news about Kirsten. She's gonna be home alone from 6 to 7, so we might kill her, then drive over to Cassie's thing, and scare the shit out of them, and kill them one by one.
Let me get your medical, stay on the line. Okay, how old is she? And her mom just said that dead. Okay, hon, we're gonna get him coming, okay?
Before we begin, I need to tell you something. If you make it to the end of this video, you'll see something that will fundamentally change how you think about evil. But I'm warning you now. What you're about to hear isn't disturbing just because of what happened. It's disturbing because of how easily it could have been prevented. And in about 20 minutes, you'll understand why this case still haunts everyone who learns about it. Now, let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered your best friend was planning to kill you? Would you see the signs? Would you notice the camera recording your final conversation? Would you sense the darkness hiding behind their smile? September 22, 2006, Pocatello, Idaho. A 16-year-old girl named Cassie Jo Stoddard agrees to house sit for her aunt and uncle. She invites her boyfriend Matt over to keep her company. What Cassie doesn't know is that two of her friends, Draper and Torey Adamcik, are parked down the street, filming themselves in the dark. In their hands, knives. In their trunk, horror movie masks. In their minds, a plan they've been perfecting for months. "We just killed Cassie," Brian will say into the camera just hours from now, his voice trembling with adrenaline. This is not a fucking joke, but here's what makes this case unlike anything you've ever heard. They filmed everything, not just the aftermath, not just a confession, everything. The planning, the preparation, the moment they walked toward her door, and what those tapes reveal about the human capacity for evil will stay with you long after this video ends. This is the story of the Scream Killers, and every word of it is true. When Deputy Karen Hatch arrived at the house on Whispering Cliffs Drive, she already knew something was catastrophically wrong. The 911 call had come in minutes earlier. A mother's voice, shattered by panic. "Somebody looks dead on my floor. Oh my God, it's my daughter's friend." Inside the house, on the living room floor, lay Cassie Jo Stoddard. She was face up, wearing yellow pajama pants with stars on them, and a white tank top. Her arms were raised above her head, frozen in a position that suggested her final moments had been spent trying to protect herself from something or someone. Her face had fallen to the right, and across her body, stab wounds, dozens of them, 30 to be exact. 30 separate times, someone had plunged a knife into this 16-year-old girl, into her chest, her neck, her limbs, her throat. Cassie was described by everyone who knew her as responsible, trustworthy, kind. She loved music and art. She wanted to be an attorney. She was the type of teenager parents hoped their own children would become, which is exactly why her aunt and uncle trusted her to watch their house while they went away for the weekend. Her mother had dropped her off the night before, watching as Cassie grabbed her bag, walked to the front door, and disappeared inside. It was the last time she would see her daughter alive. But here's the thing that will start to unsettle you. Cassie didn't die at the hands of a stranger. She wasn't the victim of a home invasion or a random act of violence. The people who killed her were her friends, and they had been planning it for months. Let me introduce you to Draper and Torey Adamcik, both 16, both juniors at Pocatello High School, both obsessed with horror movies. Torey lined his locker with posters from films like Scream and decorated it like a shrine to violence. Brian played the drums and seemed, to most people, friendly and outgoing, normal even, but beneath that surface, something dark was growing. Brian worshipped the Columbine killers. He talked openly about wanting to attack his own high school, and in Torey, he found someone who shared his twisted fantasies, someone who wanted the same thing he did, fame. They didn't just want to kill, they wanted to be remembered. They wanted to make a mark on the world, as Brian would say into the camera, and they believed that murdering people, lots of people, was the way to do it. But they needed to start somewhere, and that somewhere was Cassie. Now, before I continue, I need to tell you about the tapes, because what makes this case so uniquely disturbing isn't just what happened, it's that we can watch them prepare for it, we can hear them talk about it, we can see the moments leading up to the murder, as if we're sitting in the back seat of their car. The timestamps on the videos run from March 2006 all the way to September 22, 2006, the night of the murder, and in those recordings, Brian and Torey document everything, their philosophy, their plans, their excitement, their growing impatience. And here's the question that will haunt you as we move forward. If you could watch someone plan a murder, would you be able to stop it? Or would you, like everyone around these boys, miss the signs entirely? Let me take you back to earlier that day, September 22, 2006, morning. Brian Draper walks through the halls of Pocatello High School with a camera in his hand. He's filming. The hallways echo with the sounds of teenage conversation. Lockers slamming, laughter, the shuffle of feet on linoleum. Brian turns a corner, holding the camera low, and there she is, Cassie, standing alone by her locker. He approaches her like a predator stalking prey. The camera captures her face as he calls out to her, "Hey, look, it's Cassie." She turns, smiles politely. "Hello, Cassie, I'm getting you on tape. Say hi, please." "Hi," she says, her voice small, maybe a little confused. "Okay, see you." She has no idea that in less than 12 hours, this boy standing in front of her, this friend, will be standing over her body. Brian immediately retreats to a bathroom and films his reflection in the mirror. He seems lost in thought, self-conscious maybe, or perhaps he's already rehearsing what comes next. Later that day, Brian and Torey skip fourth period. They sit in the library, bent over a notebook. Torey is writing, Brian is filming, and what they're working on is a detailed plan, a step-by-step guide for how they will kill Cassie that night. Brian narrates into the camera. September 22, 2006. We're skipping fourth hour. We're planning for tonight. It's going to be cool. Torey looks up and smiles. It's a real smile, a genuine expression of excitement. And that's when you realize something horrifying. They're not nervous. They're not conflicted. They're happy. We've tried this 10 times, Brian says into the camera later. But they've never been home alone. Their parents always show up, but we're patient. And tonight, it's finally going to happen. Here's what you need to understand. Cassie wasn't their first target. They had tried to kill other people before. Friends, classmates, girls they knew. But every time, something went wrong. Someone's parents would come home. Plans would fall through. And so they waited. But tonight, everything was lining up perfectly. Cassie was house-sitting. She'd be alone, in a big dark house, in the middle of nowhere. Her boyfriend Matt would be there, but only for a little while. And Brian and Torey knew that once Matt left, Cassie would be completely vulnerable. They had even been inside the house earlier that evening, under the guise of hanging out and watching a movie. While they were there, Brian snuck down into the basement and unlocked a door that led to the garage. Then he located the electrical panel and made note of where it was. Everything was in place. All they had to do was wait. Around 9:50 p.m., Brian and Torey sat in Torey's car, parked down the street from the house. The camera was rolling. Pink Floyd played softly in the background. The time is 9:50, September 22, 2006. Brian says into the camera, "Unfortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our two friends, and they are right in that house just down the street. We just talked to them. We were there for an hour. We checked out the whole house. There's lots of doors, lots of places to hide. I unlocked the back door. It's all unlocked now. We just have to wait. We're really nervous right now, but we're ready. Nervous, but ready." They waited until Matt's mother came to pick him up. Cassie, frightened by strange noises and the lights going out earlier in the night, had asked Matt to stay, but his mother refused. She offered for Cassie to come spend the night with them instead, but Cassie, ever responsible, chose to stay. She had made a commitment to watch the house. She wasn't going to break it, and so Matt left, and Cassie was alone. Brian and Torey grabbed their bag from the trunk. Inside were gloves, black shirts, knives, and masks. They dressed in the darkness. Then they entered the house through the door Brian had unlocked earlier. They cut the power. They broke objects on the stairs, trying to lure Cassie down into the basement. When that didn't work, they lost patience. They went upstairs, and when they found her in the living room, they attacked. Whether Brian or Torey struck first, we don't know, but what we do know is this: they both participated. They both plunged their knives into her body over and over again, 30 times. 30 stab wounds across her chest, her neck, her arms, her legs. Cassie screamed. Brian would later tell investigators that her scream was different from the ones in the horror movies he loved. He said it was real. And then she was gone. Cassie Jo Stoddard took her final breath on September 22, 2006. She was 16 years old. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that will make your skin crawl. After they killed her, Brian and Torey didn't run. They didn't panic. They didn't break down. They got back in the car. They turned the camera on. And Brian, breathless and euphoric, said this: "We just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke. I stabbed her in the throat, and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie." Listened to that again. "I just killed Cassie, not we." Torey, sitting next to him, tells him to shut up. "We have to get our act straight," he says. "Let's go buy movie tickets now. Come on." They drove to a theater. They bought tickets to establish an alibi. They acted like nothing had happened. And here's the thing that investigators would later find so chilling. Brian's voice on that recording was crystal clear. No stutter, no stammering. You see, Brian had a noticeable stutter throughout his childhood. Friends and family said it was something he'd always struggled with, something that made him a target for bullies. But in that moment, in the car, right after committing murder, his speech was perfect. What does that tell you? It tells you that in that moment, Brian Draper felt no fear, no anxiety, no remorse. He felt alive. But let me take you deeper into something that most people don't talk about when they discuss this case. Something that makes it even more disturbing than the murder itself. The relationship between Brian and Torey. Because when you watch those tapes, really watch them, you start to see something unsettling. A power dynamic. A psychological dance between two deeply disturbed teenagers who fed off each other's darkness. On the surface, Brian seemed like the follower. He was more outwardly friendly, more socially integrated. Teachers and classmates described him as happy, normal, well-adjusted. But the tapes tell a different story. In one recording, Torey reprimands Brian for making a joke during their planning. "Don't put your humor into this," Torey says sharply, and Brian immediately backs down. "I'm not putting humor into it," he mumbles, submissive. But then, in other moments, Brian takes control. He's the one filming Cassie in the hallway. He's the one narrating their plans with confidence. He's the one who later claims ownership of the killing. "I just killed Cassie," as if it's something to be proud of. So who was really in charge? Who was the mastermind? The truth is, they were both responsible. They enabled each other. They validated each other's worst impulses. And together, they became something far more dangerous than either of them would have been alone. Psychologists call this folie à deux, a shared psychosis. It's what happens when two people with similar pathologies come together and reinforce each other's delusions. We've seen it before. The Columbine shooters, the Menendez brothers, Leopold and Loeb, two individuals, neither of whom might have acted alone, who together become capable of unspeakable evil. And here's what makes this case particularly chilling. Brian and Torey weren't isolated loners. They weren't outcasts. They had friends. They went to parties. They played sports. They were part of their school community. In one of the tapes, we see them joking around with other students in the hallway. A classmate pretends to choke, and they all laugh. It's light-hearted, normal. The kind of interaction you'd see in any high school in America. But just hours later, those same boys would be standing over Cassie's body. How does that happen? How do two seemingly normal teenagers transform into killers? The answer, I think, lies in something we don't like to acknowledge. Evil isn't always obvious. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. It wears a friendly face. It blends in, and that's what makes it so terrifying. The investigation moved quickly. Cassie's body was discovered the next day by her cousin, who had come home with her parents from their trip. The 911 call was made. The police arrived, and immediately, they knew this wasn't random. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. This was personal. Detectives began interviewing Cassie's friends and classmates, and two names kept coming up: Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik. Several people mentioned that the boys had been at the house earlier that evening, that they'd watched a movie with Cassie and Matt, that they'd left and then, strangely, called later to ask if Matt was still there when investigators brought Brian and Torey in for questioning. Both boys tried to play it cool. They claimed they'd gone to a movie that night. They had ticket stubs to prove it, but their stories didn't quite line up, and there was something else, something investigators couldn't ignore. The boys seemed off, nervous, but in a way that felt performative, like they were trying to act the way they thought innocent people would act. And then, the breakthrough. A search warrant was executed on Torey's home, and in his room, investigators found a digital camera. On that camera were the tapes, hours and hours of footage. Brian and Torey planning the murder, talking about killing Cassie, filming themselves in the car, before and after the attack, everything. When detectives watched those tapes, they realized they had something almost unprecedented, a complete, self-documented record of two teenagers planning and executing a murder. The tapes were damning, not just because they showed premeditation, though they certainly did, but because they revealed the boys' true nature, their callousness, their excitement, their complete lack of empathy. In one particularly disturbing segment, Brian looks directly into the camera and says, "I've always wanted to make a mark on the world, and this is a good way to do it, a good way to do it." Those words would echo through the courtroom during the trial. They would be repeated in news articles, in documentaries, in psychology textbooks, because they reveal something fundamental about what drove these boys. They didn't kill because they were angry. They didn't kill because they were abused or neglected. They killed because they wanted attention. They wanted to be famous. They wanted to matter. And in their twisted logic, murder was the fastest path to significance. Brian and Torey were arrested, and the evidence against them was so overwhelming, so undeniable, that there was no real defense. At trial, both boys tried to minimize their roles. Brian claimed Torey had forced him to participate, that he'd only stabbed Cassie because Torey told him he had to. Torey, meanwhile, tried to paint himself as less involved, less culpable, but the tapes told a different story. The tapes showed two boys equally excited, equally committed to what they were about to do. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Both boys were found guilty of first-degree murder. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They remain in Idaho State Correctional Institution to this day, and they will stay there for the rest of their lives. Now let me tell you something that most coverage of this case leaves out, something about the aftermath, about what happened to the people left behind. Cassie's family was destroyed. Her mother, Anna, became an advocate for victims' rights. She speaks publicly about her daughter's case, about the warning signs that were missed, about the need for better mental health resources in schools. But no amount of advocacy will bring Cassie back. No amount of speaking engagements or awareness campaigns will undo what happened that night. Matt, Cassie's boyfriend, was haunted by guilt. He blamed himself for leaving her alone. He wondered if things would have been different if he'd stayed, if he'd insisted, if he'd protected her. Therapists would later tell him that there was nothing he could have done, that Brian and Torey were determined, that they would have found another opportunity. But guilt doesn't listen to logic, and trauma doesn't follow a timeline. The community of Pocatello was shaken to its core. Parents looked at their children's friends with suspicion. Teachers wondered if they'd missed the signs. Students grappled with the reality that two of their peers, people they'd sat next to in class, people they'd joked with in the hallways, were capable of murder. And perhaps most disturbingly, the case sparked a wave of copycat threats. Other teenagers, inspired by the notoriety Draper and Torey had gained, began making similar threats, posting videos online, writing manifestos, seeking the same kind of infamy. Because here's the thing nobody wants to admit. By covering these cases, by talking about them, by making them into stories, we're giving these killers exactly what they wanted: attention. So, why am I telling you this story? Why are we still talking about Draper and Torey Adamcik nearly 2 decades later? Because ignoring these cases doesn't make them go away. Pretending they don't happen doesn't prevent them from happening again. The only way to stop future tragedies is to understand what leads to them, to recognize the warning signs, to take threats seriously, to create environments where troubled teenagers can get help before they hurt someone. So here's the question I want to leave you with, the question that haunts everyone who learns about this case. Why? Why did two seemingly normal teenagers decide to murder their friend? Why did they film it? Why did they smile and laugh and talk about fame while planning to take an innocent girl's life? The truth is, we may never fully understand. Psychologists have tried. Forensic experts have analyzed the tapes frame by frame, but at the end of the day, the why remains elusive. What we do know is this: Draper and Torey were obsessed with fame. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to be like the killers in the movies they loved, like the Columbine shooters, like the Zodiac killer, like the characters in Scream. They believed that murder was a path to immortality, that if they killed enough people, their names would live forever. And in a twisted way, they were right. We're still talking about them. Their story has been covered in documentaries, podcasts, articles. Their tapes have been analyzed by millions of people. But here's the thing they didn't anticipate. No one remembers them as anything other than monsters. No one celebrates them. No one admires them. They wanted to be infamous. Instead, they're just pathetic. Two boys who threw away their lives and destroyed a family because they wanted attention. And Cassie is remembered as a kind, responsible, promising young woman whose life was stolen from her. Her family honors her memory. Her story is told not to glorify her killers, but to remind us of what was lost. That's the real tragedy here. Not that two boys became murderers, but that a girl who had her whole life ahead of her, a girl who wanted to be an attorney, who loved music and art, who was trusted and loved by everyone around her, never got the chance to become the person she was meant to be. Before I go, I want to leave you with one final thought. We live in a world where violence is often glamorized, where killers are turned into anti-heroes, where people watch true crime for entertainment. And yes, I'm aware of the irony, given what you're watching right now. But cases like this remind us that behind every crime, there's a real person, a real family, real grief that never goes away. Cassie's family will never get her back. Her mother will never stop grieving. And no amount of justice, no prison sentence will ever undo what happened that night. So if you take anything away from this story, let it be this: pay attention to the people around you. If someone is talking about violence, about hurting others, about wanting to make a mark, don't dismiss it. Don't assume it's just talk, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes the warning signs are right in front of us, and if we ignore them, we become complicit in the tragedy that follows. Thank you for watching. If this story affected you the way it affected me, I think you'll want to see the video on your screen right now. I made it specifically for people like you. People who want to understand not just what happened, but why. Click it. You won't regret it.